Hi again, everybody. So this is the second part of this week's weekly activities. This one's going to be much shorter. This little section here is to kind of pursue our parallel track of learning about local cultures, and so this contains some references to previous material, and we're going to look at two sources: one short article that you're assigned for the weekly activities, as well as a short video that I think you'll find very interesting, because some of you were actually asking me questions about this stuff earlier on in the semester. So we'll be learning a little bit about the origin of the Haudenosaunee clans. You already learned about the clan system. We've talked about it before among the Haudenosaunee cultures, as well as the origin of the original 5 nations of the Confederacy. So let's go right into it. I'm going to start. These two sources here are the ones that are linked to in your assignment as well, and you have links in the PowerPoint that you can download on Leia. So there's one article called Discover the Origin of the... And I haven't practiced this word very much, so I'm going to give it a shot right now. I know that T's are pronounced like D's, and N's within a word are often more nasalized, so I'm going to try. Haudenosaunee. Haudenosaunee. And the colon there is kind of like a stop that I really have a hard time replicating, but I'll keep practicing this one. So the origins of the clan system, and there's a short video. It's about 5 minutes long. Haudenosaunee or Iroquois, which starts off as like which word is better, but goes into some other things, as we'll see. So, and by the way, that first article, I originally got a link to it, and earlier at the end of 2020, downtown on Peel Street, they had an installation of lights that was directly linked to this article, and there were these little QR codes that people could scan, and it would give them information, and there was representation of the 3 Ganyankahaga clans. So that was very interesting. I actually went and checked it out over the winter. So here are 3 words. So I'm going to try it again: Haudenosaunee, Haudenosaunee, and Iroquois. And so these actually technically all mean the same thing. They all refer to the Confederacy. So Haudenosaunee is Ganyankeha, which is the name of the Mohawk language. So the Ganyankeha name for Haudenosaunee. All right, and I actually only learned this winter when I first saw this article, and I asked some friends, some people that I know in Ganawake, which is a Ganyankehaga community, if it means the same thing as Haudenosaunee, because they don't say so in the article. They talk about the Haudenosaunee Confederacy, and I was like, I wonder if it means the same thing, and if it's a local term. And indeed, Haudenosaunee, it gets easier the more you practice, and I'm probably butchering it, but at least I'm trying, and I encourage you all to try to say these words. It is in the Ganyankeha language, and one of my contacts, who's an artist who lives in Ganawage, and he's from Ganawage, his name is Martin Aguianoja Loft. He's been to Vanier before. He's an artist, and he does silk screening and things like that. Print screening, I should say. He's also a photographer, so maybe you'll get to meet him one day. So, according to him, the word Haudenosaunee is actually it comes from the Onondaga language, which is one of those initial 5 nations in the Haudenosaunee Confederacy. And as you'll learn in the video, they're kind of in the middle, and their territory was considered kind of the capital region, and I guess that's where people from the Confederacy would gather, and a lot of decisions would be made collectively for the entire Confederacy. So that's something I learned from him, and also watching this video. So Haudenosaunee is the more common term for the Confederacy, and it does come from the Onondaga language. And remember, each of the nations in the Confederacy has their own culture and language, even though there's similarities. They're kind of almost dialects of each other's languages, and they all have their individual cultures, but they are united, and there are some shared things like the creation story and the clan system. Right? Iroquois, most of you come into this class, and what you've heard before is Iroquois. That's what they teach you in elementary school and high school. And, I do know some people who are from one of the Haudenosaunee nations and who will use Iroquois. So there's always individual preferences there. But as indigenous people, non-First Nations, non-Haudenosaunee, it's better to use the word Haudenosaunee, and in the video that is expressed as well. A lot of sources that I've read say that Iroquois is a French creation, and that might come from often a lot of the words that were used by early settlers. They would hear one group of indigenous people say a word in reference to another group, and they would interpret that as meaning that was the name of the group. That's where Mohawk comes from. The word Mohawk for Ganyangehaga people is a derogatory word used by another group. I think the Massachusetts people, because Massachusetts is a state, but it comes from the name of a local people. Same with Eskimo. That was somebody else's word for Inuit people. So, Iroquois, it does sound more French than English, and so a lot of sources say it comes from the French. Now, the woman who's speaking in the video, and I'm going to try to say her name, Zadeodi, says that it comes from the English. So, who knows? Okay? So, Iroquois is to be avoided by people who are not from this culture these days. So the origins of the clans and nations. So that's what you're going to learn a little bit about in the article, especially like in terms of the origins. Now you're going to read a story there, and the story takes place between the creation story. So remember back, I think in week 2, you watched a video about the creation story with Sky Woman, and we've talked about it again more recently because Kaylee, our guest from week 8, just before the break, talked about the creation story. Some of you read her blog post about that, and she talked a little bit about it in her presentation as well. So that's the original creation story of the world, according to Haudenosaunee cultures. So this story that you're going to read about takes place after that, okay? But before the creation of the Haudenosaunee Confederacy, which you learned about, I think, in week 3, and we learned the story of the creation of that. So the peacemaker's journey, right? Who came around and said, you have to stop warring with each other and unite into this confederacy and this great law of peace. So we learned those in the beginning, right? And this story kind of comes in and takes place in between those two. And I'm bringing it up now after the break because we're going to learn a little bit in the coming weeks about local Ganyankehaga cultures and histories. And so this fits in with that because this installation that I talked about on Peel Street was created in consultation with local Ganyankehaga communities, and the article that you're going to read will mention a little bit about where the 3 clans of the Ganyankehaga come from. So the story that you're reading this week brings up the creation of the clans. So I'm not going to go into it here because you'll read about it, and it's very short and it's very clear. And so, you know, someone comes along and kind of talks about, you know, okay, so we have these clans that are being created. They're matrilineal, so you already learned that way back when, right? So clan identity is passed down through the mother. You belong to your mother's clan. And if you're a woman, your kids will be in your clan. If you're a man, your kids will be in their mother's clan, and you have a role. You have obligations to your own blood children as well, but also obligations to your sister's kids because they are in your clan. There was, in this story, there's mention of like the establishment of these clans is less about division, and it's more about uniting them in terms of having mutual support between the clans, mutual accountability. And exogamy. Exogamy is a term we learn in anthropology as well. It refers to marrying outside of one's clan. And so this is very typical around the world where you have exogamous marriage, meaning that you, say if you have a clan system, marrying outside the clan avoids at the genetic level, it avoids too much inbreeding, which if there are genetic issues that would get passed down, but it also maintains alliances between clans and good relations, right? So when you have a society that's split up into clans, then continuous marrying between clans and even between communities kind of keeps the gene flow going in addition to keeping good relations. And so there's also in that same story, then later on, there's discussion of like, okay, so after a while, there was a creation of 5 nations of the Confederacy, and the different nations wound up splitting up the clans amongst themselves. So as we'll see, the Ganyenkehaga locally kept 3 of those original clans, and we'll see that on the next slide. Now, over time, as the story goes that we're reading this week, those 5 nations wound up, in the beginning they kind of maintained the peace, but they wound up warring with each other. And then after some time, that's when the Peacemaker's journey story that we learned, I think in week 3 or 4 now, I don't remember, peace came back with the Peacemaker, who came and helped create the Haudenosaunee Confederacy and promoting peace among these different nations. So it's kind of a 2-in-1, right? Because we're learning about the creation of those clans originally, way back after creation, and then later on the creation of those nations, which would eventually form the Confederacy. So, as I mentioned, then in this story, they also talk about when these nations came into existence, those original 5 nations, that the Ganyenkehaga locally kept 3 of those clans. And then you scroll down, there's some beautiful artwork on this page, by the way. I encourage you to kind of take a little bit of time to look at that beautiful artwork. And they have representations of the 3 different clans that maintained within the Ganyenkehaga nation, the turtle, wolf, and bear clans. And they explain a little bit about kind of the symbolism behind these clans and some of the kind of roles and duties of these clans. And then when you watch the video with Tsadeyodi, who is Onondaga, she explains to a child, because the child is asking her questions. One of those is Iroquois versus Haudenosaunee, which we already talked about in a previous slide, but also the duties of these different nations. And she gives a couple of examples which are really interesting. She refers to the Ganyenkehaga. She uses the word Mohawk, so again, there are these individual differences sometimes. But when she says Mohawk, we're talking about locally, close to us here, the Ganyenkehaga Nation, as the keepers of the Eastern Door, and she explains that a little bit. Kaylee also talked about that with that idea of that long longhouse across the Confederacy and the Ganyenkehaga being at the eastern extreme, and she talks about the capital being in Onondaga territory. So you'll learn a little bit more in depth of things that we've already touched on earlier in the semester. So I hope you find that interesting, and as always, if you have any questions, please feel free to reach out.